The movie takes place in 1981 in San Francisco. It follows Chris Gardner, a salesman who has invested all his savings in portable bone density scanners, which are crucial to his life. Each day, he drops his son, Christopher Jr., at daycare and then goes to hospitals to demonstrate the scanners, trying to convince doctors that they are a useful improvement over standard X-rays. However, Chris needs to sell at least one scanner every month to support his family. But most doctors think the scanners are too expensive and unnecessary. This makes it hard for Chris to make sales and meet his financial needs, frustrating his wife, Linda, who works as a hotel maid. One evening, Chris sees a Rubik's Cube at home, a new toy at the time. When Linda asks if he has paid their taxes, Chris admits he can't until he sells a scanner, which makes Linda even more stressed. After she leaves for work, Chris tries solving the Rubik's Cube and finds it surprisingly easy. The next day, Chris notices a businessman with a sports car and asks what he does for a living. The businessman reveals he is a stockbroker, explaining that his job depends on math and social skills. Inspired, Chris starts dreaming of becoming a stockbroker. He even tells Linda that he will be home late because he plans to apply for a job in that field. When Linda hears about Chris's plan, she belittles him, leading to an argument about their unpaid rent. Determined, Chris visits a brokerage firm that offers a broker training program. Since the scanner is too bulky to bring inside, he leaves it with the street performer. While applying, Chris sees the street performer running off with the scanner. He quickly leaves to chase her, but loses her when she escapes on a train. The next morning, Chris goes to Dean Witter Reynolds, a stock brokerage firm, to submit his application form directly to Jay Twistle, a lead manager and partner at the company. Their meeting is brief, as Jay is in a hurry. As Chris walks down the street, he spots the street performer and an accomplice with his stolen scanner. After a furious chase, he retrieves the scanner and heads home, where Linda's frustration grows because he still hasn't sold any scanners. A month later, Chris sees Jay trying to hail a taxi. He reminds Jay about his application form, but Jay is in a rush. Seizing the moment, Chris tells Jay he is going to the same place. Inside the taxi, Chris attempts to talk about his skills and personality, but Jay is preoccupied with solving a Rubik's Cube. Chris impresses Jay by solving the Rubik's Cube just before Jay exits the taxi. However, Chris realizes he doesn't have money to pay the fare, so when the taxi stops at a red light, he runs away. The driver chases him into a BART station. Chris boards a train, but loses one of his scanners when the door closes on his hand. Later, Chris calls Linda to apologize for being late. Linda, upset about missing her shift, tells him she plans to leave with their son, Christopher. Chris rushes home to find his family gone, but receives a call from Jay inviting him for an interview about the internship. The next morning, Chris confronts Linda after she drops off Christopher at daycare. Linda says she's unhappy, and Chris lets her leave but insists she can't take their son. That evening, he picks up Christopher and brings him home. The day before the interview, Chris agrees to paint his apartment to delay eviction due to unpaid rent. While painting, two policemen arrive at his door, informing him he must go to the station to address his numerous parking tickets. As a result, Chris spends the night in jail, complicating his plans for the interview the next day. Chris has no choice but to call Linda to take care of their son while he is away. Fortunately, she agrees. The next morning, Chris rushes to his interview at Dean Witter, arriving on time but still in his shabby clothes. Despite his appearance, he impresses the interviewers and secures a 6-month unpaid internship, competing with 20 others for a paid stockbroker position. After the interview, Chris returns home to wait for his wife and son. Unfortunately, his unpaid internship doesn't satisfy Linda, who announces she's moving to New York for a job at her sister's boyfriend's restaurant. Chris bluntly tells her she can't handle being a single parent, and she agrees to leave Christopher with him. A week later, Chris and his son move to a cheaper motel with the help of a friend. On a Saturday, Chris and Christopher play basketball. When Christopher shares his dream of going pro, Chris discourages him, saying it's difficult to achieve. Seeing his son's disappointment, Chris quickly changes his tune, encouraging him not to let anyone, even himself, say he can't achieve his dreams. Later, they go to a hospital where Chris manages to sell one of his bone scanners, providing some money for them to live on. The next day, Chris starts his internship, eager to learn the trade. During lunch, he spots the scanner he had left behind during his escape from the taxi driver. He chases the man carrying it, but fails to retrieve it after getting hit by a car. Sometime later, Chris gets a chance to meet an important client, a top-level pension fund manager, to discuss the company's products. As Chris runs out of the building, his supervisor asks him to park his car, causing Chris to miss his important meeting. Over dinner, Chris tells his son they might go to a football game. The next morning, they visit Mr. Ribbon, the important client Chris had previously contacted. Chris thanks Mr. Ribbon for the opportunity, even though he missed it. As they are about to leave, Mr. Ribbon, learning about their football game plans, invites them to join him. During the game, Chris explains his company's products to Mr. Ribbon, but Mr. Ribbon declines his offer. However, Chris gets to talk with Mr. Ribbon and his businessman friends, who are potential clients. Things start looking up for Chris, until the IRS garnishes his bank account for unpaid taxes, leaving him broke. Later that day, Chris spots the man with his stolen scanner at a public park and finally retrieves it. They try to sell the scanner, only to discover it's broken. Additionally, Chris and his son return to the motel to find they have been evicted, with their belongings placed outside. Chris ends up with less than $22 in his bank account, leaving him and his son homeless. They are forced to stay in a restroom at a BART station one night, where Chris quietly cries, hitting the lowest point of his life. Realizing they can't continue like this, they go to a homeless shelter the next day, almost getting turned away because it's full. At night, Chris attempts to repair the broken scanner and studies for the stockbroker license exam, which he aces. Despite his limited work hours, Chris knows that maximizing client contacts and profits is essential to securing the broker position. He develops efficient phone sales techniques, focusing on potential high-value customers. He defies protocol to ensure he and his son get in line early at the homeless shelter. Despite his struggles, Chris never reveals his dire situation to his colleagues. He even lends $5 for cab fare to one of his bosses, Mr. Frome, an amount he can hardly spare. To earn extra money, Chris donates blood and uses the funds to buy a part needed to repair the scanner. He successfully fixes it at the homeless shelter. Soon, Chris sells the last of his scanners to a physician, making enough money for them to afford a night in a hotel. As Chris wraps up his last day of the internship, he is called to a meeting with the partners. Mr. Fromm comments on Chris's new shirt, and Chris explains he wanted to dress appropriately for his final day. Smiling, Mr. Fromm tells Chris he should wear another new shirt tomorrow, revealing that Chris has earned the coveted full-time position. Holding back tears, Chris shakes hands with the partners and expresses his gratitude. Before he leaves, Mr. Fromm reimburses him for the cab fare he had lent earlier. Chris rushes to his son's daycare and embraces Christopher. The movie concludes with Chris and his son walking down the street, joking and smiling, as the real Chris Gardner, dressed in a business suit, walks past them.